Hello and welcome to Ladies of Lore, the podcast where we take all of the most wonderful women from mythology and folklore and we unpick, unravel and explore their origins, their stories and how they've changed through time to arrive in today's modern world. I'm India and I am so grateful to have you here with me today. Happy July. I feel like I'm becoming one of those people on this podcast that always posts on the first day of the month on their social media saying like, wow, this year is going too quickly, please slow down. And maybe I'm just becoming a Facebook mum, I don't know. But it's July and that's freaky deaky to me because how did that happen, please? Please slow down. Anyway, firstly, I wanted to say thank you so much for the amazing response to the Queer Women of Mythology episode. It's so nice to hear from those of you who are both part of the LGBTQ plus community and who are allies. And it's definitely something that I'd like to return to at some point because there are lots of stories that I didn't get a chance to cover. And I also just wanted to apologise about the delay. I have had a chest infection and I have been coughing and coughing and coughing and coughing and coughing. And quite frankly, I didn't think that was something that you all needed to hear or would want to hear. So I've been a bit behind, both on here and on the Patreon, but I am endeavouring to catch up and make it right for you all. But do bear with me if my voice does some funny things today. Just pretend you didn't hear it. Thank you. Thanks in advance. Anyway, today we are heading back into the world of Disney to tick another princess off the list. And today we're going to be stepping inside the pumpkin carriage. We're going to be taking off our glass slippers and getting our toes out and running home at midnight to learn all about the real story behind Cinderella. And you might be surprised to know that her origins actually stretch back pretty far. And the story of a mistreated yet virtuous girl who ascends to royalty is actually one of the oldest and most pervasive folklore archetypes in human history. As per usual, we're going to go right back to her origins, see how the story of Cinderella has changed through time and through place, and obviously we're going to do a little examination of the Disney classic and its live action counterpart, and you know how much I love those, and we're going to land right in the here and now and see where she is today. I'm excited. I like doing these Disney episodes, so if you're ready with a drink and a snack, and if you can hear that car in the background, I'm very sorry. Let's get going. The story of Cinderella, as I said, far predates the 1950 Disney film. In fact, the Cinderella narrative exists in over 1,000 variants across the world, appearing in cultures across Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond. So it's kind of difficult to pinpoint any exact origin. Now, you know me, I love to tell you guys stories, so what I thought I would do, if that's okay with you, is tell you some of these very early Cinderella-esque tales from varying cultures, and you can have a listen and you can see if you can spot the similarities to the version of the tale that you know. It's not very hard though, I will say, because a lot of them do involve missing shoes. To begin, I'm going to take you back to the earliest recorded Cinderella story, which is the story of Rhodopis, which dates back to the 1st century BCE all the way over in Egypt. And this Greco-Egyptian story appears in the writings of Strabo, who was a Greek geographer and historian. In his Geographica, Strabo recounts the tale of a Greek slave girl named Rhodopis living in Egypt. And the story goes a little bit like this. Long ago, in ancient Egypt, there lived a young girl named Rhodopis. She was not Egyptian by birth. She had been stolen from her home in Greece by pirates and sold into slavery. Her hair was the colour of sunrise, her skin pale like river lilies, and because of this, the other servant girls mocked her. They called her strange, and they treated her like an outsider. While they chatted amongst themselves or lazed back beneath the shade, Rhodopis worked alone, washing clothes, grinding grain, or chasing geese back into their pens. But Rhodopis had one secret joy: dancing. When her chores were done and no one was watching, she would slip away to the river's edge. There, in the hush of reeds and waterbirds, she would dance barefoot in the sand, twirling and leaping, her shadow graceful beneath the setting sun. An old man who tended the garden, a very kind-hearted storyteller named Aesop, once saw her, and instead of laughing, he actually gifted her a pair of delicate slippers, and they were made from rose-red gold, light as feathers, and they glinted like sunlight on the Nile. And he told her, "These are not for hiding, they are for dancing." One day, news came that the pharaoh was holding a great festival. All were invited, from the richest nobles to the humblest servants. But when the day came, the other girls deliberately piled Rhodopis with extra chores. "You wouldn't belong there," they said. "You'd only shame yourself." Heart sinking, Rhodopis watched them leave in chariots, their eyes sparkling with mischief. Left alone, she did her work in silence. As the sun climbed high, a great shadow passed overhead. A falcon, the sacred bird of the god Horus. It swooped down and it snatched one of her golden slippers from behind the river. Rhodopis cried and ran after it, but the falcon just soared higher and higher until it disappeared into the sky. Far away at the festival, the pharaoh sat unmoved by dancers and acrobats, bored with flattery and jewels. And then the falcon appeared, circling above him. With a sudden cry, it dropped something into his lap. A single golden slipper. The pharaoh held it up, the sunlight catching the strange foreign shine. He took it as a sign from the gods. "I will marry the one this slipper fits," he declared. "She is the chosen." Messengers searched across the kingdom. Nobles and servants alike tried on the slipper, but it fit no one. Eventually, they came to the home where Rhodopis lived. The other girls scoffed and hid in corners, hoping to keep her out of sight. But the slipper found its way to her hand, and when she slipped it on, it fit as if woven from her own steps. And so she was brought before the pharaoh. He saw the second slipper still in her possession, and when she danced, his heart stirred, not because of her beauty, but because she danced as though the earth and the sky had taught her how. And so, the servant girl with the golden slippers became queen, not through riches nor birth, but by something rarer: being seen. And there you go. It's pretty clear to see that this tale already carries some essential Cinderella elements. We've got the heroine's low status, her beauty, her virtue, and the symbolic significance of a lost slipper leading to her recognition by a nobleman. And now, if we fast forward in time just a little bit over to the 9th century CE and we travel on to China, we get to perhaps the most well-known non-European version of the Cinderella tale. And this is the tale of Ye Xian, a Chinese folktale from the Tang dynasty, found in Duan Chengxi's Miscellaneous Morsels from Youyang. And this version is remarkably sophisticated and aligns very closely with the modern Cinderella structure. So, let's crack on with Cinderella tale number 2. In a distant time, in the land of ancient China, there lived a girl named Ye Xian. Her mother died when she was very young, and her father, a local chieftain, remarried a woman who brought with her a cold heart and a daughter of her own. Ye Xian's stepmother looked upon her with envy, for she was clever, kind, and quietly beautiful, with skin like porcelain and eyes as clear as spring water. After her father died, Ye Xian's life darkened. She was forced to live in a cave near the edge of the forest. Her fine clothes were taken, her days consumed by labour, fetching water, gathering firewood, cleaning endlessly, while her stepsister wore silks and grew haughty. Her only comfort in this exile was a large fish that came daily to the edge of the lake. It had golden scales and eyes that glowed like lanterns, and only Ye Xian could see it. She fed it scraps, she whispered secrets to it, and in time it would lift its head from the water and rest it in her hands. But the stepmother, sharp-eyed and suspicious, discovered the secret. Pretending kindness, she coaxed Ye Xian away, and on an errand, in her absence, disguised herself in Ye Xian's rags and lured the fish out of the water. Then she killed it, cooked it, and fed it to her daughter. When Ye Xian returned and found only blood-stained stones by the lake, she wept until an old spirit appeared, shimmering like wind in silk. He told her to gather the bones of the fish, every last one, and keep them hidden, for they still carried magic. When you are in need, the spirit said, pray to them. Time passed. The spring festival approached, a time of music and matchmaking, and the stepmother, fearing Ye Xian's beauty might attract attention, forbade her to go. Then, while the others prepared, Ye Xian knelt before the fish bones and whispered her wish. In answer, a gown flowed from the shadows, pale green like bamboo leaves, embroidered with golden thread, and a pair of shoes like moonlight, delicate, strong, and impossibly small. Ye Xian slipped them on, and in an instant, she became something otherworldly. At the festival, nobody recognized her. People whispered, they craned their necks to look at her. Even the king noticed. But before he could speak to her, Ye Xian, afraid of being discovered, fled into the forest, and in her haste, left behind one golden shoe. The king, entranced by the shoe and the girl who had worn it, declared that he would marry only the one it fit. Many tried, rich women, noble daughters, but none could wear it. Then he travelled to the edge of the forest, where the forgotten girl lived. And when Ye Xian placed her foot inside the shoe, it fit like second skin. She brought out its pair and the gown, and she stood before the king not as a servant but as the girl from the festival, quiet and unshaken. The king married her, and he took her far from the cave and the cruelty. As for the stepmother and her daughter, some say they were banished, others say they vanished. But in all the tellings, Ye Xian never looked back. She had not waited to be saved. She had only asked for a chance to become herself. And there it is, another Cinderella story. And again, this one presents several familiar elements. We've got the oppressive stepmother, we've got magical assistants, we've got a lost slipper, and a prince king-like figure who rewards this hidden nobility. So they are really quite similar to the story that we all know and love. And now I want to take you over to the Islamic world, where several Cinderella-like stories have originated, with one notable version being the little red fish and the clog of gold. And this is part of Middle Eastern folklore, and it's documented in Persian and Arabian oral traditions. And while specifics do vary a little bit, as they always do with these myths and folklore tales, the heroine is a poor girl, sometimes named Mar Pishani or Moon Forehead. I gave you a moment's silence there. Moon Forehead, whose magical fish helps her rise above her mistreatment. Now, like I said, this tale has varying different versions, so I'm going to just tell you a version that I liked the most, and it's sort of collated from a few different sources, so I will make sure all of the sources, as usual, are in the show notes so you can have a read. So yeah, let's tell that story now, shall we? In ancient Iraq lived a kind-hearted fisherman and his lovely daughter, Maha. After her mother's passing, Maha pleaded with her father to remarry, and he chose their friendly neighbour, and she was a widow with her own daughter. At first, she was warm, but the stepmother soon grew envious of Maha's beauty and brightness, forcing her into endless chores while her own child remained pampered. One morning, as Maha carried fish from her father's boat, she heard a small voice pleading from her basket. A tiny red fish, shimmering with life, begged her to set him free. Moved by kindness, she released him, and the fish promised, "Call for me any time and ask what you will." Years later, word spread of a grand wedding, a bride's family celebrating with a traditional henna party. All the town's women would gather, but Maha's stepmother forbade her to attend. Heartbroken, Maha remembered the fish, and at the river's edge she whispered her wish. In an instant appeared a shimmering silk gown and gleaming golden sandals. The fish warned her, "Leave before your stepmother arrives." Maha arrived at the party. She looked radiant. Women admired her, and the bride's brother, Tariq, stole glances. Giddy with wonder, Maha stayed until her stepmother's arrival. Startled, she fled, Running so fast a sandal slipped into the water and sank unseen beneath the footbridge. After the celebration, Tariq discovered the golden sandal. Entranced, he told his mother they must find its owner, for she would be his bride. They visited every house. Mahar's stepmother hid her in the oven. In the oven, my goodness, determined to let her daughter try the sandal on first. And just as the search seemed over, a rooster atop the oven crowed. "The one you seek is hidden below." And they opened the oven, and out stepped Mahar. Tariq presented the sandal, and the moment she slipped it on, his heart knew. And there are other versions of this story where there is some reward money involved, and the stepmother tries to poison Mahar's stepsister into beauty with an oil, but that completely backfires and she loses her hair, and the groom then refuses her. I don't know if that's because she's bald or because of other reasons. And then he goes on to choose Mahar, and they get married. Either way, the wicked stepmother and stepsister, they just vanish after this, and they're very malicious and they're very rude, and they don't deserve to be in the rest of the story. And Mahar goes on to marry Tariq. And that is the tale of the little red fish and the clog or the sandal of gold. And this version of Cinderella, like I say, it's something we're just all so familiar with, but it's rich with this Middle Eastern charm. You've got talking fish, you've got henna ceremonies, golden sandals, and a rooster telling you that somebody's in the oven. And this sort of reflects the motif's eastward transmission, and it demonstrates that there are so many different regional adaptations of the core Cinderella themes, in contrast to the more sort of moralistic European versions, which we will come on to very shortly. The Islamic tales often more focused on fate and divine justice. And isn't it just so interesting to see how different cultures focus on different elements of the tale? Because as Europeans, we just, everything's got to be all about the morals. A moral tale that's a recurring theme that we have in all of these Disney episodes, really, when it comes down to sort of folklore and folk tales, and it's all got a very deep moral lesson, whereas the Middle Eastern, like I say, they focus more on elements of fate and divine justice. And I just love that how you can have this core story at the centre, but the way that they're told and the different focuses depending on culture it's just incredible to me. I'm just nerding out, but I really enjoy that. And before I go on to tell you the more well-known stories as told by Perrault and the Brothers Grimm, I wanted to tell you one more tale, because Cinderella-like tales also existed in European oral tradition for centuries, and the Italian story of Cenerentola, recorded by Giambattista Basile in Pentamerone in about 1634, is among the earliest European literary versions of Cinderella, and it's rougher, it's older, it's earthier than the versions that came afterwards, and it's far more cunning. So I'll tell you that, and then we can talk about Charles Perrault. There once was a prince who ruled a great kingdom, and in it lived a nobleman with a daughter named Zezola. Her governess was kind, clever, and very dear to her, far more than her own stepmother. One day, the governess suggested a dark idea. If Zezola wished to be truly happy, she might consider helping rid herself of her cruel stepmother. And Zezola agreed. At the governess's instructions, she closed the heavy lid of a chest upon her stepmother's neck and killed her. The governess married the nobleman and became Zezola's new mother. But as soon as she secured her new place, she showed her true self and revealed 6 daughters of her own. These stepsisters treated Zezola like a servant, stealing her dresses and feeding her only scraps. And they also gave her a new name, Cenerentola, the Little Ashes, for she was always dusty from the hearth. Her only solace came from a fig tree growing atop a fairy's enchanted island. One day, her father travelled to Sardinia, and Zezola begged him to bring back only one thing, the first twig to strike his hat. And he did this, And she planted this twig beneath her window and she watered it with her tears, and in time, a fairy sprang from it, and they promised to aid her whenever she called. One day, a grand festival was announced held by the king, who sought a wife. Zezola begged her father to let her go, but her stepmother scoffed and locked her away. And after they left, Zezola called on the fairy. Out came silks more dazzling than the sea and a carriage made of gold. She went to the ball, and no one knew her. The king was instantly spellbound, but at midnight she fled. This happened 3 nights in a row, and on the 3rd night, as she fled, she lost a slipper. Not a glass slipper, but a finely embroidered slipper. The prince vowed to marry nobody but the girl that it belonged to. He went house to house, and each of the 6 sisters tried, but their feet were too large or too small. Cenerentola was hidden behind the stove, but the prince insisted, and when she appeared, the shoe fit as though woven to her soul. And she became queen. Her stepmother and her stepsisters, humiliated, were cast down from their schemes. But Cenerentola, who once committed murder for the promise of love, now ruled with silence, beauty, and maybe a little bit of a dangerous smile. And this version was the foundation upon which Charles Perrault and later the Brothers Grimm built their somewhat more sanitised versions. And I think these are going to be the versions that you will recognise most out of everything that I've told you today. So let's have a little look at Charles Perrault's Cinderella, or The Little Glass Slipper. Charles Perrault's The Little Glass Slipper, first published in 1697, is one of the most influential literary versions of the Cinderella tale. This work marked a bit of a transformation of oral folklore into a more refined literary form, suitable for the salons of King Louis's France, reflecting both the values of the aristocracy and the emergence of the literary fairy tale as a genre in its own right. Perrault's version of Cinderella is notable for its graceful, moralising tone and the introduction of several now iconic elements: the glass slipper, the pumpkin coach, the fairy godmother, and the transformation scenes. And these features, as you know, are not found in all global variants of the Cinderella story, but here Perrault brings them all together to become a version that would be dominant in Western literary and popular culture. If we have a little look at sort of the historical and social context of Perrault's Cinderella, we can see that it's deeply embedded in the cultural atmosphere of late 17th century France, particularly the courtly world of Versailles under King Louis XIV. And the story reflects aristocratic values like beauty, grace and etiquette, and the power of social mobility through marriage, albeit a little bit fantasised. Cinderella, though mistreated and forced into servitude, is depicted as an inherently noble, patient, kind and elegant woman. And these were qualities that marked her as somebody who was fit to rise in rank, not through rebellion or through agency, but through grace and virtue. So in this way, Cinderella serves as a bit of an educational tool for girls, reinforcing these passive virtues and the acceptance of hardship with the promise of eventual reward. And Charles Perrault himself was a very well-connected figure in literary and political circles, and he wrote these fairy tales late in life. He was a member of the Académie Française and took part in the literary debates at the time about the relative value of classical and contemporary literature. And his fairy tales, especially Cendrillon or Cinderella, exemplify his modernist sympathies because they all sought to express contemporary moral values and manners in a new narrative form. Perrault aimed his stories at children, particularly girls, who were being trained in the values expected of them in high society, values that we've just said, like obedience, charm, grace, virtue and modesty. And these types of stories, like I said, were read aloud in salons and often carried subtle critiques or reinforcement of social norms of the time. And one thing that is actually really interesting, and you might not know this, but I'm going to tell you, is actually the glass slipper itself. Now, The French word verre, meaning glass, has sparked a lot of speculation that Perrault might actually have meant verre, which is a type of fur. So it could be that it's just a bit of a misinterpretation, or it could be a deliberate pun, but most scholars agree that glass was the intended choice because it emphasises this sort of magical, impractical nature of the slipper. Although I feel like a fur slipper is equally as impractical. Do you not think? I don't know. I mean, I suppose you can go into a shop and you can buy furry slippers that are in the shape of, like, dog's feet. I mean, you can buy Shrek slippers, so I don't know. I don't know. But this sort of serves as a really unique identifier for the heroine, and it's one of the big motifs and something that underscores this theme of transformation that we see throughout Cinderella. Anyway, back to the moral tone and away from feet. Perrault's version actually also ends in two very specific moralities, and these are very short rhyming verses which sort of serve to reinforce the story's lessons. And the first of these suggests that beauty is a treasure, but graciousness is invaluable. And it's this latter quality that earns favour and fortune. So I will read that to you now. Beauty in a woman is a rare treasure that will always be admired. Graciousness, however, is priceless and of even greater value. This is what Cinderella's godmother gave to her when she taught her to behave like a queen. Young women, in the winning of a heart, graciousness is more important than a beautiful hairdo. It is a true gift of the fairies. Without it, nothing is possible. With it, one can do anything. So you can really see how this theme of teaching young girls to be gracious and humble is really rammed down your throat when you read this. And the second morality warns that even without godparents or magic, intelligence and virtue may still secure success, though not as easily. And it goes like this. Without doubt, it is a great advantage to have intelligence, courage, good breeding and common sense. These and similar talents come only from heaven, and it is good to have them. However, even these may fail to bring you success without the blessing of a godfather or godmother. And these moralities, they really reflect the didactic role that fairy tales began to play in the early modern period. And in case you were wondering about the whole stepsister thing, this version ends on a bit more of a gracious note. Cinderella does forgive her stepsisters, and she actually arranges for them to marry noblemen at court, which, do we think they deserve that? I don't think they really deserve that, but that's by the by. The publication of Cinderella was part of a larger movement where women and men in aristocratic circles began to transcribe and transform oral folk tales into literary narratives. But Perrault's version has had the most lasting impact, in part due to its accessibility and its real clear morals. And its influence extended well beyond France, inspiring countless retellings, theatrical adaptations, ballets, and eventually the famous 1950 Walt Disney film, Cinderella, which we'll come on to in just a minute. But in the broader context of sort of children's literature and folklore studies, Cinderella marks the emergence of a genre that blends entertainment with moral instruction, tied closely to gendered expectations. While folkloric Cinderella figures existed long before Perrault, as chronicled like we heard earlier, it was this literary shaping of the tale that turned Cinderella into a Western cultural archetype. And the enduring legacy of Cinderella lies in its careful negotiation between fantasy and social ideology, magic and morality. So what could possibly come next, I hear you ask me? Well, it was the Grimm brothers version, and this was called Aschenputtel, and it's a much darker tale which is much closer to Germanic folk roots. There's no fairy godmother, instead Aschenputtel, Aschenputtel. I've said it so many times now that I actually don't know if I've said it correctly. Aschenputtel receives aid from her dead mother's spirit, who dwells in a hazel tree that she waters with her tears. Birds and nature and spirits assist her. And this version was published by the Grimm brothers in 1812 in their Children's and Household Tales, and it was later revised in 1857. In this telling, Aschenputtel's mother dies and her father remarries a woman with 2 daughters who force her into servitude. Her name, meaning Ash Fool or Little Ash Girl, reflects her degraded position, and if you think back to what I just told you, it sort of calls back to the earlier tale of Zezola. Unlike Perrault's version, where a fairy godmother magically assists her, here she prays at her mother's grave, where the hazel tree grows, and a white bird in the tree grants her wishes, symbolising maternal protection and Christian grace, rather than any kind of external fairy magic. And again, the famous ball scene appears over 3 days. Each evening, Aschenputtel receives beautiful dresses from the tree so that she can go and attend the feast. To escape, she flees each night, and on the final night, the prince uses pitch on the palace stairs to trap her golden slipper. And if you're a musicals fan, like me, that might have made you think about Into the Woods, where the prince pours pitch all over the steps of the palace. And if you've seen the movie, Anna Kendrick is sitting there stuck to the steps of the palace. And now that song's in my head, and it's going to play in my head while I'm recording the rest of this episode. So I'm sorry if I've given you all an earworm. I'm not sorry, actually. That you can have my earworm too, we can share. But yes, the prince uses pitch on the palace stairs and it traps her. And the only way that she can escape is by yanking her foot out of her golden slipper, which remains stuck to the stairs. And in this telling by the Grimms, the slipper is actually gold, not glass, because it emphasises wealth and divine reward rather than fragility and beauty. And when the prince searches for the owner, the stepsisters actually mutilate their feet to fit the shoe. One cuts off her toe, and the other cuts off parts of her heel. Birds actually warn the priest? There's no... The priest? Birds warn the prince by singing about the blood in the shoe. And finally, when Aschenputtel tries on the slipper, she is recognised as the true bride. And at her wedding, and get this is the most romantic thing that could possibly happen at any wedding, doves peck out the stepsisters' eyes as punishment for their cruelty. Pretty dark. But there's a reason for that, and that is because this story arose in 19th century Germany, where the Grimms were trying to preserve oral folk traditions that they saw as authentically German in an era of romantic nationalism. And the darker moral justice in their version of this tale, and many of their other tales, reflect the harsher realities and moral codes of peasant storytelling, where virtue is rewarded and cruelty receives severe retribution. Their audience included children, but these tales were also intended to instill moral and social lessons on adults as well. And it's definitely a big departure from Perrault's Cinderella. The Grimm Cinderella is so much more brutal. And Perrault's version, it popularised the fairy godmother, the pumpkin carriage, the glass slipper, and it framed Cinderella as elegant but passive. And she was gracious within this sort of French courtly world, and in contrast, Aschenputtel is a bit more of an active figure. She prays, she works, and she seeks out divine aid rather than relying on external magic. And the moral lessons actually also differ here. Perrault's ends with forgiveness and grace, while the Grimm's ends with violent punishment for evil, aligning more with the Lutheran moral sensibilities of sin, consequence, and divine justice. And the story of Aschenputtel is often seen as a narrative of transformation, of grief, of individuation, and from a Jungian perspective, Aschenputtel represents the true self, who is oppressed by the shadow aspects of her family. Her stepmother and her stepsisters embody envy, narcissism, and destructive female rivalry, and these are archetypes found across all cultures. The ashes themselves symbolise death and rebirth, and in many initiation rituals, ashes represent humility and purification. Aschenputtel, sitting amongst the ashes, is a liminal state of waiting, from which she emerges transformed, a bit like a phoenix from the ashes. And the mother's grave and the hazel tree are also pretty significant psychological symbols, because the grave represents this sort of lost, nurturing mother, but also a source of inner strength, as Aschenputtel's prayers to her mother are the thing that brings her aid. The tree symbolises growth from grief. She plants it and she waters it with her tears, and it becomes her source of hope. The white bird that grants her wishes is interpreted as a manifestation of her mother's spirit, or as a symbol of the Holy Spirit in Christian readings, representing grace and divine favour for the pure of heart. And you can even look at the stepsister's self-mutilation from a bit more of a psychological perspective, because it shows how damaging the lengths are that people will go to for social approval and power. And their blindness at the end of the tale can be interpreted as the loss of inner vision. And their moral blindness leads to literal blindness, which is a classic fairy tale motif of punishment through poetic justice. So there you go. There are quite a few differing versions of the tale, but as I said, there are actually so many more Cinderella variants that have been catalogued by folklorists, which, when you think about it, is truly crazy, isn't it? From all over the world, all different cultures across time, we all seem to have this story of a girl and a shoe. You know? Mad. When you sit down and think about it. Quite cool. But some other notable versions that you might want to check out include the Zuni tale of Maid and the Misty Skies, which is a Native American story, and this is the tale of a mistreated girl receiving help from magical beings. There's a Filipino story of Mariang Alimango, in which a magical crab assists a poor girl, and there's an Indonesian tale where two stepsisters, one kind and one cruel, experience very dramatically different outcomes based on their virtue. So it's pretty clear to see that across cultures and across centuries, Cinderella or Cinderella tales serve as a symbolic narrative of hope, moral justice, and the transcendence of virtue over superficial beauty or social class. The consistent presence of magical intervention, abusive domestic relationships, and redemptive recognition by a figure of power reflects deep psychological and cultural archetypes. And there's a really interesting quote by folklorist Ruth Bottigheimer, and she said that Cinderella's evolution is not just the story of a poor girl becoming a princess. It is the story of narrative transformation, from oral tales told by women to literary versions crafted by men to modern reimaginings that reclaim the heroine's agency. So there you go. Cinderella is not one tale, but many. An Egyptian slave, a Chinese orphan, an Arab outcast, a German peasant, a French belle, yet across all of these stories, she remains the emblem of enduring grace in the face of suffering, and a beacon of justice for the oppressed. And that takes us nicely to 1950, where we'll take a little look at how Walt Disney took this collection of Cinderella stories and cooked them up and boiled them down into the extremely well-known Disneyfied story, because Cinderella was actually a really important movie to the studio. Let's find out why. Walt Disney's Cinderella of 1950 emerged as a pivotal project that both revitalised the studio after its post-war financial struggles and reshaped the global cultural memory of the tale. The initial idea of adapting Cinderella into an animated feature dates back to the mid-1930s. Walt Disney had considered it amongst his earliest story development lists after the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. But with the onset of World War II and financial difficulties resulting from the war's impact on distribution markets, the project was actually postponed up until the late 1940s. And by this time, the Disney studio was incredibly deep in debt. Cinderella was viewed pretty much as last chance saloon. It was the final opportunity to stabilise the company's finances. And because of this, Walt Disney personally supervised a lot of its story development. He ensured that it contained that ultimate blend of romance, humour, and musical elements that we love in a Disney movie to maximise broad audience appeal. And in order to do this, the story team, including the artist Joe Grant and writer Bill Peet, took the story and streamlined a lot of its darker elements from the grim version and focused more on the gentler Perrault version. The fairy godmother and the pumpkin carriage and the glass slipper, they were all drawn directly from Perrault's Cendrillon, and there was no mention of hazel trees. there was no foot mutilation going on, and there were no birds pecking out eyes and blinding people. We had to keep it PG, We had to keep it family friendly if this movie was going to actually save Disney Studios. And one of the most interesting aspects of development of this movie was Disney's use of live action reference footage for nearly all of the scenes, and that was done to reduce animation costs and enhance realism in character movements. And there's an actress called Helene Stanley, and she was filmed acting out Cinderella's scenes, and animators then used that for reference to achieve those sort of subtle feminine gestures and emotional expressions. The mice, Lucifer the cat, and the dog Bruno were all added to inject a bit of comedic relief and just to widen the story's narrative really beyond that linear romantic arc, and that tapped into Disney's strength in creating endearing animal side characters. The film's musical numbers were integral to its success. Songs like A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes and Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo became instant classics which we still know and love today, and the latter song in particular was crucial in establishing the magical mood of the movie, and it was actually nominated for an Academy Award for the Best Original Song. The film's score and songs aligned with Disney's strategy to create a marketable, catchy music, ensuring that the film's legacy extended to records and radio broadcasts, because that's going to bring in more of those dollar bills. In public reception, Cinderella was an enormous success upon its release in February of 1950, and it earned over $4 million in its initial US release, restoring the studio's financial stability and enabling Disney to expand its operations, build Disneyland, and invest in television ventures. Critics praised its charm and its emotional warmth and animation quality, comparing its significance to Snow White. And the film also marked a pretty cultural moment. It was post-war America, and they sought hopeful, beautiful fairy tales to counteract the years of wartime anxiety and austerity. And the Cinderella story of transformation and romantic fulfillment, it fit that need perfectly. It was a perfect storm for the Disney Studios. Interestingly, despite its idealised femininity, which reflected very much the 1950 gender norms, the film has also been interpreted as expressing post-war female anxieties and aspirations. Cinderella remains trapped in domestic drudgery until supernatural intervention and marriage to a prince liberate her. And that reinforces a patriarchal framework, but also dramatises women's desire for escape and transformation within a consumerist culture. And over the decades, Disney's Cinderella has become the definitive version of the tale in global popular imagination. The glass slipper, the Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo spell, and the shimmering blue ball gown are still iconic in merchandising, in theme park imagery, and later adaptations, including the 2015 live-action remake. This version that Disney created eclipsed all of the literary and folkloric complexities of Perrault and the Grimms and created instead a myth of romantic salvation through beauty, kindness, and magical luck, which is really reflective of Disney's mid-century ideology and broader American cultural ideals of aspiration and reward. And what about today? Well, today, Cinderella exists far beyond Disney. She's an academic subject, she's a feminist battleground, she's a meme, and she's even a fashion icon. In the modern world, Cinderella continues to permeate literature, film, television, music, visual art, and she functions as a living cultural template adapted to diverse ideological, aesthetic, and commercial needs. Its narrative of suffering, transformation, and reward resonates so deeply in global storytelling, and its meanings are increasingly contested and reimagined. So we'll have a little look at where we can find Cinderella today, and we'll start with literature, because in contemporary literature, Cinderella appears both in just direct retellings and in allusions that critique or expand on its themes. For instance, in Margaret Atwood's poem Cinderella's Diary, published in 1984, Cinderella reflects on her royal life with a bit of a melancholy resignation. And it implies that her marriage wasn't really a perfect escape, but it was actually another form of confinement. And that is such an interesting read. I'd really encourage you to go and read that one. I really enjoyed it. And then you have sort of more wacky versions like Marissa Meyer's Cinder of 2012. And that's the first novel in her Lunar Chronicles. And In this book, Cinderella is recast as a cyborg mechanic in a dystopian future, and it's this sort of clash of science fiction and play politics to interrogate identity, humanity, and agency within oppressive structures. And then Angela Carter's Ashputtel, or The Mother's Ghost in the Bloody Chamber of 1979, draws more upon the Grimm's darker version to explore female power and maternal legacies, creating a reimagining that foregrounds violence, sexuality, and vengeance rather than passive virtue. And these are just some examples that reveal modern literature's tendency to sort of deconstruct Cinderella and focus on interiority, trauma, and social critique rather than the idealised romance of the Disney movie. In film, beyond the 1950 Disney version and its 2015 live-action remake, Cinderella stories appear in adaptations like Ever After, starring Drew Barrymore. Great movie. And this film situates the narrative in Renaissance France with a historically grounded feminist reinterpretation. Cinderella, or Danielle, is portrayed as an educated, assertive woman who actively resists her stepmother's oppression, reads Utopia, debates human rights with Leonardo da Vinci, and chooses love without waiting passively for rescue. Another absolute bangaroony, another classic, is the 2004 film A Cinderella Story, starring Hilary Duff. And this takes the narrative into a modern high school, utilising digital communication like emails and texts as the new glass slipper, showing how Cinderella can remain relevant when its structures are updated to fit modern times. More recent films like Cinderella of 2021, starring Camila Cabello, emphasise female ambition and economic independence, with Cinderella here being portrayed as an aspiring dress designer, rejecting royal life to pursue her own career, mirroring third-wave feminist ideals. That one, not so good. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that. If you have, please let me know. I did watch it. Actually, I don't think I even finished it. I don't think I finished that movie because I think I really hated it. And I think I don't often not finish movies and books and things that I don't like, but I think this is one of the times when I genuinely said no thank you. I think I'll turn this off. I think this is actually quite terrible. Television frequently uses Cinderella as a narrative backbone. In the series that I still haven't watched, Once Upon a Time, Cinderella's story is interwoven with other fairy tales, but reconfigured to explore moral ambiguity, trauma, and redemption. And I've read that there are multiple versions of Cinderella across alternate universes, but obviously I'm just talking from academic journals I've read and articles that I've read, so I don't know. You tell me, what's Cinderella like in Once Upon a Time? But a really interesting take that you have from TV and Cinderella is actually reality TV, because reality TV has a tendency to sort of exploit the Cinderella trope. You have so many makeover shows like What Not to Wear and Extreme Makeover, which, as an aside, that's very problematic, isn't it? We had one called 10 Years Younger here in the UK. I don't know if any of you guys outside of the UK had this show, but they would take someone and they would do an absolute boatload of surgery on them. Is that what happened in Extreme Makeover as well? They would change this person's entire face and body and tell them that they were fat and that they needed to just be a different person. Which now I look back on it as a 30-year-old woman, it's a bit problematic, isn't it? It's a bit problematic. You don't need surgery. You are perfect as you are. That's what I have to say about that. But these shows, they do follow this Cinderella-like transformation. They frame beauty and consumerism as pathways to success and self-realisation in our capitalist society, which is a bit depressing. It's a bit depressing, isn't it? A little bit. Oh dear. I'm hitting some deep truths today. In music, Cinderella appears both literally and metaphorically. The rock band Cinderella in the 80s used the name to evoke glam and fantasy appeal. Beyoncé references Cinderella imagery in Best Thing I Never Had as she reclaims agency from a failed relationship, rejecting the fantasy of needing a prince. Britney Spears' song Cinderella of 2001 portrays the singer's refusal to remain trapped in a dependent domestic role, directly countering the fairy tale's original moral of obedience, which is really interesting. Interesting take by Britney. And one of the more recent musical allusions to Cinderella is Taylor Swift's Bejeweled music video. Now, I am a Swiftie, so this is going to be a little bit Swiftie heavy for a minute. But the Bejeweled music video, released in October 2022 as part of Taylor Swift's Midnight album visual rollout, is actually directly influenced by the Cinderella narrative, but reframed to align with Taylor Swift's themes of reclamation, autonomy, and defiance of patriarchal expectation. The video opens with a parody of the traditional Cinderella setup. Swift herself plays Cinderella, living under the petty tyranny of her evil stepmother, played by the magnificent Laura Dern, and her stepsisters, played by the Haim girls. The early scenes evoke familiar imagery. She's scrubbing floors, serving tea, enduring ridicule, yet these are infused with Taylor Swift's characteristic humour, self-referential irony, and a good old bit of feminist edge. Unlike the classic Cinderella, whose escape from oppression comes through marriage to a prince, Swift's character in the Bejeweled video regains her power and shine through her own decision to step out, take up space, and reclaim her glamour. The lyrics best believe I'm still bejeweled. When I walk in the room, I can still make the whole place shimmer. I didn't know how to say that. I didn't know how to say that without singing it. Reject the traditional moral of quiet patience, rewarded by external salvation. And instead, they assert self-worth, independent of male validation, echoing Taylor Swift's broader artistic narrative of self-ownership after her disputes over music rights and industry control. And the music video itself is really rich with Cinderella iconography, reimagined for Swift's era and message. You got the glass elevator, which replaces the glass slipper, representing this upward mobility achieved through her own artistry rather than romantic selection. The fairy godmother is replaced by Taylor Swift's own magical agency as she transforms into her bejeweled gowns without any external permission. The prince, played by Jack Antonoff, is ultimately a bit irrelevant. And the video ends with Taylor Swift alone in the castle, having taken it for herself rather than marrying into it. And this twist subverts the traditional fairy tale ending, positioning the castle as a metaphor for her artistic empire and her personal autonomy. And Taylor Swift also integrates medieval and Renaissance aesthetics. You've got Gothic palace interiors and crystal imagery to create this timeless yet contemporary fairy tale visual language. And these design choices echo the historical ball culture of Cinderella tales, while reclaiming the spectacle as a site of female power rather than objectification. The inclusion of the Haim sisters and Laura Dern as stepmother just deepens this intertextual play, with their very over-the-top camp performances referencing Disney's comedic villainy but reworking it into feminist satire. And this video actually was really recognised as a strategic deployment of fairy tale imagery to narrate Swift's journey through the music industry, where she moves from suppression to triumphant re-emergence, and even more so now she's just reclaimed her masters. If you are a Taylor Swift fan, you will know this. The video's choreography, direction and styling all reinforce Cinderella's enduring iconography while asserting Taylor Swift's postmodern twist. She chooses her own narrative and shines without needing a prince's validation. And that was me on my soapbox about the Bejeweled music video, but I did do this about Beyonce, so it's only right that I also do it about T-Swizzle herself. And I'm just going to backtrack a little bit on something that I mentioned earlier on, which was Stephen Sondheim's Into the Woods, the musical. And this is a musical that offers a really deeply subversive and psychologically nuanced reinterpretation of Cinderella, along with many other fairy tales, and it diverges significantly from the traditional Cinderella. In the musical, Cinderella isn't passive, she isn't unquestioning, she isn't this dreamer of romantic salvation like she is in the earlier versions by Perrault, for example. Instead, she's a very conflicted and introspective young woman whose desires evolve over the course of the narrative. Initially, she wants to go to the King's Festival, which is very much reminiscent of sort of the classic longing for escape and transformation that we see over the course of many different Cinderella tales. But once she gets there, once she gets her prince and her wishes are granted, her internal uncertainties begin to surface. She repeatedly tries to escape from the prince, not out of shyness or demureness, but she's actually really deeply unsure of what she wants. And this is a really interesting take, because in most of these tales, we get to the point where she meets her prince and she has her happily ever after, but we don't see what happens next. So what happens after happily ever after? And that's something that Into the Woods really explores very well. And Cinderella's indecision, it really suggests this deep awareness that happiness might not actually lie in the traditional conventional fairy tale ending. And rather than just stepping into this happily ever after situation, Cinderella in Into the Woods wrestles with the idea of agency and the consequences of having your wishes fulfilled. Her prince is initially portrayed as charming, but he's also really shallow, he's unfaithful, and he eventually confesses, "I was raised to be charming, not sincere." And their relationship is revealed to be hollow, challenging this myth of romantic destiny. And when confronted with his betrayal, Cinderella chooses to leave him, asserting her independence and her moral clarity. And this is such a massively radical departure from traditional portrayals where the union with the prince is the reward. So Into the Woods does a really good job of transforming Cinderella from a one-dimensional character into a really thoughtful, morally grounded individual who grows through disillusionment. Rather than being a passive recipient of her fate, she becomes an active moral agent who must navigate grief and betrayal and loss in a world where actions have very complex repercussions. And in doing so, Into the Woods dismantles the binaries of good and evil, reward and punishment that are often very definitive in fairy tales. And Cinderella's journey becomes emblematic of the broader themes of the musical, which is that life is complicated, wishes carry unforeseen consequences, and maturity lies in facing these complexities with responsibility and courage. Now, I'm a really big musical girly, so obviously I've seen this. You might not have seen it. There is a movie version of it. Sadly, it has James Corden in it, but you know, we move. We have to just sometimes we have to take the rough with the smooth, you know. It also has Meryl Streep. And as I said earlier, it has Anna Kendrick, it has Emily Blunt. Gosh, who else does it have in it? You know what? I'm just going to look it up right now. Look, this is me researching in real time. We've got Meryl Streep, we've got Emily Blunt, Anna Kendrick, James Corden, Chris Pine, Daniel Huddlestone, Billy Magnuson, Christine Baranski. It's got a very, very big cast, and I would 100% recommend giving it a little watch if you are into musicals. And it's just a really interesting take on various different fairy tales, and it's very dark in places, and yeah, I would just definitely recommend checking it out. Outside of the world of music and musicals, modern art continues to engage with Cinderella iconography, often in a critical way. Cindy Sherman's photographic series Fairy Tales of 1985 include really grotesque, ambiguous Cinderella imagery, exploring the violence and constructed femininity embedded within such myths. I will put a link in the show notes so you can have a look at this photographic series, because it's really interesting. It's freaky deaky. It's disturbing. Feminist interpretations and studies of Cinderella highlight both its role in reproducing patriarchal ideals and its potential for subversive reinterpretation. Simone de Beauvoir in The Second Sex briefly references Cinderella as an archetype of passive femininity taught to girls, to be silent, to be beautiful, and patient in suffering until rescued by male power. Marina Warner in From the Beast to the Blonde in 1994 analyses how Cinderella's humility and domesticity have been romanticised to enforce gender conformity. Yet she also traces older oral variants where Cinderella uses cunning to engineer her escape. And I suppose when we go back to sort of the domesticity of it all, it makes sense, doesn't it? It tracks. Who are these stories being told to? You know, if we think back to the court of Louis XIV, these stories were being told to little girls to help them mould them for their later life, to teach them where they belong in society. And there are various other critiques that I came across and that I read about, including one by Jack Zipes in Fairy Tales and the Art of Subversion, and he criticises Disney's Cinderella as an instrument of capitalist patriarchy, selling the ideology that personal happiness is found through beauty and through heterosexual marriage. And then more recently, feminist scholars have explored how contemporary retellings reclaim Cinderella as an agent of her own destiny. And I read a really interesting piece of work by Rebecca Ann C. Do Rosario, and that focuses on Cinderella in ballet form, and specifically the costuming in ballet versions of Cinderella. And she argues that the costuming of Cinderella as a ballet can actually either reinforce or subvert the gaze and power dynamics embedded in the tale. So it all comes down to the costuming. And that was a really, really interesting article that I read. I will pop that in the show notes as well so you can have a little look, because I realise I'm going on and on and on at you. But yes, overall, when you think about Cinderella in the modern world, she functions as a bit of a mirror and reflects evolving cultural values, anxieties and aspirations. The story's enduring flexibility, from dystopian cyborg to Renaissance feminist, popping up in pop songs to critical feminist art installations, confirms the status as a manuscript that has been scraped and written over and over and over and over again, but still retains hints of the original. A bit of a composite narrative, one upon which each generation writes its own struggles with gender, class, power, and the human longing for transformation. So there you have it. Cinderella may be a girl made of ashes, but her story has burned so very brightly through time, through space, through cultures. Whether she's a peasant girl with a little fish helping her out, whether she's a glass-slippered darling of French salons or an animated saviour of a struggling film studio, she has well and truly gone to the ball in every era in some pretty cool pairs of shoes. In the words of folklore scholar Marina Warner, fairy tales endure not because they are unchanging, but because they change with us. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Ladies of Lore. I really appreciate you listening. If you have enjoyed it, please do consider following or subscribing on your favourite podcast platform. If you want to hear more, you can check it out over on Patreon, where I have my exclusive series Heroines of History, as well as access to the Discord server and the book club, which I will be announcing the first book for this week. Had to push that back as well because, quite frankly, I've been, like I said, like a Victorian child on my deathbed. But from now, it will be there. It will be very much there. So yeah, feel free to go and check that out. No pressure at all though, guys. If you want to do that, great. If you don't, that is fine. Ladies of Lore is here to stay very much. And we're coming up to our first anniversary. I feel like I should do something. If anyone's got any ideas of what I can do for the first anniversary of this podcast, let me know. But I'll be back next week to unravel another thread in the rich tapestry of women in mythology and folklore.